I was a year ahead of Peggy. If you went to a dance, you always saw her there. And I knew who she was. The art department, the art and architectural department, which was a big department at Auburn. Auburn had a big, renowned architectural school. And they had the Beaux Arts Ball every year. And it was a costume ball. And there was a guy on campus by the name of Percy Alford. Percy was a year older than I was, but played football. But people always got us confused. They always got us mixed up. I remember one time I came out of church and this girl came up to me and she says, "I never want to see you again." And I'd never seen her before. But she obviously had confused me with Percy. And Percy and I would laugh and joke about it. The Beaux Arts Ball comes along. I'm in the restroom, standing at the urinal with my costume on, and Percy is next to me. And so one of us said to the other something. We said, "Let's exchange uniforms and see if we can, costumes and see if we could exchange dates." So we did. I had a date with a girl from Mobile by the name of Ann Wilson, and Percy had a date with Peggy. Well, the women immediately knew something was up, but we always laughed about that was kind of how we really met. That must have been like my junior year, her sophomore year. I was driving by and I saw her walking up under the flagpole there at Sanford Hall. I remember exactly where I saw her walking across the campus. And so I went back to the fraternity house, and that night I called over her dormitory. And this is my version. I think her version is different. And I told her who I was, and I said, "You have a date Friday night?" She said, "I have a date Friday night." I said, "Well, how about Saturday night?" She says, "Okay." And our first date, we went to one of the new movies that were in town. We paid 35 cents a head to go to the movie. And then there was a bakery next door there, and we went in, and I remember we had coffee and oatmeal cookies. And then we went over to the fraternity house. We might have walked, because you could walk anywhere you wanted to on campus. And then she probably had to be in by 11 o'clock. So I took her home. I took her back to the dorm. And I remember that I intuitively tried to kiss her, and she let me. And after she let me, she looked at me and she says, "You're the first boy that's ever kissed me on my first date." And I almost started laughing because I thought she was pulling my leg, because she wasn't the first girl I'd ever kissed on the first date. And she says, "No, that's right, you're the first one." I said, "Oh, well, okay." She came in and her roommate said, "I saw you with Bob Culbertson, and there's something special there." And she laughed at it. I came back to the fraternity house, and there was a World War II veteran there. And he says, "Culbertson, you better watch that girl. She's going to get you," or something like that. And I laughed about it. I said, "That's totally absurd." Well, as time went on, we got thicker and thicker, and then we got pinned after Christmas. Well, I went off the Navy. She went back to Auburn. She worked that summer, went back to Auburn. We would talk some on the telephone. That was back when talking on the telephone was real expensive. Well, poor old Peggy, she's got to go down there and work, and I'm going to sea to Europe, all that stuff. I bet I went on that ship 2 weeks before I realized I had a bum side of that deal. Even though I was over in the Mediterranean and I was close to the Riviera and stuff like that, we'd come in and we'd be there for maybe 3 days, and I'd get 1 day off. And the rest of the time I was cleaning boilers or doing some of the other stuff that needed to be done. And so and you were always back at night, so it wasn't all that glamorous. But the main thing was just being away from her. Our being gone for that year, so far as I'm concerned, totally convinced me that I loved her and wanted to marry her. And so she went back to Auburn her senior year. She was secretary of the student body. She was Miss A-Day. She was a beauty. She was all this sort of stuff there. In a year, we saw each other 4 weekends. And I remember coming back and begging her to get married. She said, no, Bob, I'm not going to marry you until I pay off my debt. And I said, how much do you owe? And she said, $2,000. And I said, well, I've got a little over $2,000 in the bank. Suppose I pay it off. And she said, okay, only under the circumstances. I'll marry you, but only under the circumstances that I can go to work and put that $2,000 back in the bank before we have any children. It's a deal. I got a ring from my mother, and I gave it to her the 4th weekend, and we got married on the 5th weekend. And our honeymoon consisted of driving from Auburn to report to duty in Norfolk. That was our honeymoon, 2 days on the road. And it was later, maybe a month or so later, that we decided to go to New York. The thing that I liked most about her is she was pretty and she was smart. And she had something I used to call gumption. She had a very independent, strong streak about her. I knew she was a strong person. I knew she wasn't going to get run over. She had gotten where she had to a great deal on her own, and she wasn't going to be beholden to anybody. I'd ask her any number of times later on, I'd say, why did you marry me? Because I really had to do some talking to get her to marry me. I think in hindsight that had the customs and the opportunities for women been then what they are now, she would have said, I'm going to go into law school. I kept after her, and she says, okay, I'll tell you. I knew you wanted to get married, and I figured I didn't want anybody else to have you, and then you were a pretty good catch. And so she says, so I agreed to marry you. And our marriage was very simple. I mean, there wasn't any big bridesmaids party. There was one maid of honor in our wedding. That was it. I drove into Auburn. She had agreed to join the Episcopal Church. She had been raised as a Methodist. And so she joined the Episcopal Church. Her family came up from Jackson, Alabama. Mine came down from Albany, and family came up from the Carolinas also.